Okay, so I'm doing prompt two, and before I start, I have a fever, so if I sound weird, that's why. But so in prompt two, we basically have to summarize three different works by Freire, Adichie, and Baldwin. And I'm gonna start with Baldwin first because I personally like Baldwin first. So, as a quick summary to Baldwin's essay, A Talk to Teachers, which I believe is chapter four. Yeah. He basically talks about an address to teachers in New York City from the year 1963. He does describe the current times as very dangerous. He identifies a menace that threatens the American social order as a phenomenon that comes from within. Basically, he's saying that we are almost self-destructing ourselves in a way. He's saying we're in America. We uh, we live in a very dangerous world, and that's basically what he's saying. He also notes that if teachers entrusted with molding the hearts and minds of the youth seek to rectify the ills that plague the nation, they can expect to meet the most determined resistance. Basically, so Baldwin talks about how he basically talks about how society has changed with teachers, and he explains how teachers are kind of failing at their job. And Freire also talks about this, but he's basically saying that teachers are failing their job. That's what they're saying. Okay, so Baldwin begins his argument by asserting that the purpose of education, which is designed to perpetuate the aims of society, is to teach people to look at the world around them and enable them to make decisions about it on their own. Basically, he's trying to say is you should come up with your own ideas, your own marketing grant. You shouldn't you shouldn't just listen to what people tell you and take it as truth. You should figure out what you believe in and put it into yourself. This is why I hate fevers. Okay. The paradox that results from this commission, however, is that if the institution indeed succeeds in creating individuals capable of independent thought, those individuals will quickly recognize the wrongs in their society and will endeavor to change them. Basically, if you're not being lazy and you're choosing and you basically learn to think for yourself, you're gonna realize very quickly that there's a lot of things wrong in society, and they're gonna go out of their way to change them. He also goes on to say he observes no society is really anxious to have that kind of person around because he's a free thinker. People don't like them. People like to go with the way of the flow. And he basically is saying if you don't, then people are going to regret you. There's a silly ad. The paradox takes on added dimensions of complexity in the case of African Americans. From the time he is born, the Negro is taught. I don't like saying that word. The Negro is taught that he lives in a country that guarantees liberty and justice for all. But in practice, his treatment at the hands of the countryman affirms that he is of no value or worth beyond his devotion and uselessness to the white man. So when this was written, a lot of civil rights activists were going on at the time. It's in the 60s. And basically what he's trying to say is that back in the day, African Americans were put through a lot. They were basically told how to live. They didn't get to have their own free thought. Now this isn't true everywhere, but it's what he's observing. It's pretty interesting. Before he can even begin to analyze what he says, the African American child perceives the squalidness and dangers of the ghetto neighborhood in which he is forced to live, in contrast to the finer, friendlier environment beyond its borders. He senses that he is living in a society that figuratively and literally assigns him to the back of the bus. And what he's saying there is, of course, the uh, the whole thing back in the 60s where if you were colored, you had to sit in the back of the bus, and if a white guy told you to get up, he wanted your seat, then you had to do it. It was a very big time because this is a little off topic, but I like it. Rosa Parks was a very influential person during the civil rights movement because she was sitting down, and a white guy on a bus told her to get up, and she refused, and she went to jail, and it's caused all these riots. but she stood up for what she believed. She sat down for what she believed in, and it was truly great. And I'm having trouble talking. When he becomes capable of better understanding the inequalities he faces, he questions why the better things in life are not for him. Capable of better understanding the inequalities he faces, he questions why the better things in life are not for him. Basically, he's saying, why me? Why? How come because my family's from a different part of the world, how come my skin's darker, that I have to live life differently than everybody else? And it was a big deal. Personally, you kind of pissed everybody off with that free thinking, but it was true, you know. Like, why were they treated like lesser human beings? Because they had dark skin. They weren't white. As awareness develops, anger grows within, and eventually turning to rage and hate because it cannot be expressed. So basically, the further you go on figuring out why life is, and you figure out the situation you're in, you're going to get angrier. Because if you never had a pure thought, then you could probably just live a happy life. But if you start thinking, you're going to say, how come I have to go to a bad school, whereas the white guy who lives on the other side of town gets to go to a rich school? Or why do I have to take a different bus? Why do I have to drink from a different water fountain? You know, it just, people, as you determine that you are seen as not equal, you start to view the world through hatred. Having been rejected by the social structure of his country, he learns to live outside of it, surviving by his wits and awaiting. Basically, that's the final assertion of it. Basically saying, once you realize that the social structure of the world has rejected you, you're gonna learn to live outside of the rules. You're gonna not listen to people as much. You're gonna have more fun. And it's up. It really does. Alright, so I'm gonna start doing the questions instead. So overall, what the author is saying. The author is basically saying that society is unequal. It's unequal back then, and you could argue saying it's unequal now. And basically that's the point that he's trying to get at. Okay. Why are they saying it? He's saying it to raise awareness, because not that many people knew about all the problems. And like even nowadays, you'd be surprised how many white kids don't really learn that much about African American history. And it's kind of sad. What is the rhetorical situation these authors were writing in? Basically, the rhetoric situation he's writing in is basically saying that the world's effed up. Our country's effed up, and by the time you realize it, you're gonna get mad. Pretty simple. What is your background compared to the author? So, I am not, as you can see, I don't look it, but I am actually Korean. My dad was born in Seoul. My mom was born here. So, because my mom's German, I mainly have white skin. So, I really haven't gone to it. I mean, I am actually very proud of who I am. It's just hard to explain it to some people, but I enjoy who I am. And that's what I like about me. But I've not gone through the same stuff that he has. Nobody really has. The author's talking about a lot of problems. Basically, me reacting to the text, I like it. I like what he's saying. I like the fact that he's pushing towards people who need to see society in a different way. I enjoy it. I like how he's writing it. My ideas. So my ideas of Baldwin has not changed at all. I kind of knew he was an activist, and by reading the text, I just kind of like him more. He does some very good things, and he's done some very good things, and I like that he's trying to bring attention to the world. So that's it for Baldwin. Next I'm probably going to do Freire. Alright. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about Freire's and the book Pedagogy of the Oppressed. And I'm just going to give the summary, how it means to me, and then I'll answer the question. It should be fairly easy. So Paul Freire's Pedagogy of the Oppressed is a combination of philosophical, political, and educational theory. Freire outlines a theory of oppression and the source of liberation. So basically in the book, he basically is saying oppression is real, we should know about it. So in Freire's view, the key to liberation is the awakening of critical awareness and the thinking process in the individual. So basically he's saying we have to be able to think for ourselves. We have to be able to push the boundaries of us to become better. And if you don't, you're just going to become mindless, and it sucks. This happens through a new type of education, one which creates a partnership between the teacher and the student, empowering the student to enter into dialogue and begin the process of humanization through thought and its correlative action. So what he's saying is the way to better your awareness and the way to fight oppression is, he's theorizing it's through proper education, through a teacher and a student, and building that connection. Freire begins his book with a preface which introduces the idea of developing a critical consciousness in the oppressed. Freire introduces the problem of the fear of freedom in the oppressed who are affected by being submerged in a situation of oppression. Basically, the book starts out with him talking about people being oppressed in the world. It's pretty quite simple. Freire introduces the problem of the fear of freedom in the oppressed who are affected by being submerged in... Okay, I read that one. Oppressed people must see outside themselves, understand their situation, and begin to think about their world. So basically, if you don't want to be oppressed anymore, you have to start thinking about yourself. You have to take in information on your own, and don't just listen to what other people are telling you. This happens through dialogue and education. Freire makes it clear that his perspective is radical, and that to agree with this series, the reader must embrace change. Basically, he's saying the way teaching works now is very dull, and he'll talk about it later, and if he doesn't, I'll bring it up. But basically, he's saying we have to change, because if we don't change, then oppression will always stay. Freire relates critical consciousness and the resulting synthesis of thought and action as a way to reclaim humanity, to become humanized. This, Freire contends, is a fundamental drive of humanity, while oppression is dehumanizing both for the oppressed and for the oppressors. Basically, you have to think for yourself. It's what it's repeating here. Oh my god. Freire states that only the oppressed can save themselves and the oppressors from oppression, and liberation must come from within the oppressed, who must work their way through thought to a critical understanding of reality, which leads to action. So he's basically saying the oppressors can't change it. If you want to change who you are, you have to change the oppressed, not the oppressors. Freire called the traditional relationship of teacher and student banking education. In this dysfunctional operative system, the teacher retains control and takes on the role of an oppressor, while the student is expressed to be a passive, unthinking follower. Basically, what it's saying in layman's term is, for an example, you go to class, and it's a 50-minute class, and all you do is the professor just gives you information the whole time. Nothing else happens. You're basically being oppressed because you're not allowed to think. You're stuck just sitting there and listening, and it sucks. The teacher deposits information into the student, who is an empty receptacle for those deposits. Freire proposed problem-posing education as a successful alternative to traditional education. Problem-posing education is structured to encourage thinking in students. In this form of education, the teacher and the student enter into partnerships and join in a dialogue to jointly come to conclusions about problems. The solution must not be predetermined by the teacher, but instead must be come together during the process of dialogue. Teacher and students learn from each other. That's a lot. That's a lot of words to basically say teachers can also learn from students. That the oppressed students doesn't have to always be the one just soaking up information. You can let the teacher soak it up, and that'll be very details on methodology to work with people in a community to understand the themes that are important to their lives and to generate objects for study, such as pictures, audio interviews, film strips, text, or other media, to serve as the focus of dialogue. Then Freire outlines how this theory too applies to politics and to the rise of revolutionary leaders among the oppressed. He outlines 4 oppressive techniques that are opposed to dialogue and that oppressive leaders use to control the people. These are conquest, divisions, manipulations, and cultural invasion. 4 pro-dialogue revolutionary techniques stand in opposition to these and must be used by revolutionary leaders. These are cooperation, unity for liberation, and organizing, and cultural synthesis. What a mouthful. Basically, we have to help each other. We are social beings. We are social creatures. We usually can't live on our own. Now, some people try, but most of us depend on others to live. Even when you're 30, you depend on family, or when you're 80 and stuff like that. Basically, he's saying that we have to change the techniques of teaching to better enhance students. Like, for instance, instead of just talking the whole time, you can play games with the students to make them learn the information. You can have more interactive stories. You can do all that fun stuff. Alright, so what is the author saying, and why are they saying it? So he's basically saying that teachers are oppressors and students are oppressees. And if we want to get out of this mentality, the oppressed must change their way of thinking. And he's saying this because he wants to see change. What is the rhetorical situation these authors were writing in? He was basically writing about how... He was basically writing about liberation and change, which is an underlying theme. My background compared to the author, it's the same as Baldwin. I've never gone through what they've gone through, but I have stories of my dad who can tell me that. So they're very different. My initial reaction is, it's an interesting theory. I don't know if it'll work all that well, because it's very radical. He says it himself. It's a very radical thing. You have to be able to allow change, and change is hard for a lot of people. And my ideas haven't changed. I agree with him 100%. It's pretty easy. Alright, that's it for Freire. Okay, so I am going to talk about Adichie's The Danger of a Single Story, which, first of all, too long, okay? When you want to, like, this is just my opinion, but you want to make things quick and to the point, and she makes the same point over and over and over and over again. It hurts listening to it, because it's just the same thing over and over again. It's like, alright, you made your point. So this is about The Danger of a Single Story. Basically, to summarize what she talks about, she starts out talking about how she was a reader as a kid, but she only really read English and American books, because, well, that's what you had to read in Nigeria. And she goes on talking about all the stuff that she does in her life, and all these different stories, that the way that they ended were interesting. A lot of times she talks about reading in different cultures, and she talks about, like, her book, and she talked about how, like, somebody told her that you should make a sequel, and told her how to make a sequel. It got to the point. Like, it's about a 20-minute video, and it gets to the point at about 10 minutes. And then it just keeps going and going. And it's like, you've made your point. You really don't need to keep talking. That's just how I feel, though. I don't like it when writers fluff, which is why I have a very problem with when writing essays. It's required to be so many amount of pages, because you're going to get fluff. I always believe that when writing an essay, the length of it shouldn't matter. If you have all the information you need, then that should be how it's done. You shouldn't have to get a paper and then they tell you it has to be 1,000 words, or it has to be 5 pages, single space, 12 font. It's like, you're going to get me to repeat myself a lot. And it kind of feels like that's what she's doing. It kind of feels like TED Talks told her, you have to talk for 20 minutes. So make it 20 minutes. And she just repeats story after story. But the basics of it is that a single story can change your life. And and we are filled up with so many different stories in our lives that that there's very much that can happen. I'm gonna move straight on to the questions now. So what is she saying? I kind of already answered that. She's basically saying that life is made up of stories, and one story alone could alter how you are. And she's saying it probably to raise awareness, would be my guess. The rhetoric situation, oh boy, that 20-minute thing. She basically talks. I already covered that. What is your background compared to the author? She grew up in Nigeria and then came to the U.S. and then went to Mexico. I've been in the States my whole life, so I'm different than her. My initial reaction to this whole thing is, it's interesting. It's a very topical subject. I don't know. She has good points. She just drags it out too long. And my ideas that changed, I back up the fact that you shouldn't add fluff. But, she has very interesting ideas, and I can agree with them. Our lives are made up of millions of moments, and one single moment can change your life. That's kind of how I see it. Alright, that's it. Alright, bye.